Welcome to Acknowledging Chochenyo Land and History. If you have not already muted yourself, please do so. And at this point, we're going to not see everybody's friendly faces. But when we get to the end and we take questions and chat, then we would love to see your friendly faces. So please, please start your video at that point. We are going to record the meeting, and we're going to take questions in the chat box. Please select Sarah Miller, and you're going to see a little pull down menu, and please select Sarah Miller and address your questions to her. And if you have any technical issues, like you're having trouble with your sound or anything like that, please address those to Kristen Smeal. She is our technical person for this program tonight. So let me introduce our speaker, Francis Mendoza. Francis is a Filipinx immigrant, naturalist, environmental educator, and Jedi consultant who specializes in working with marginalized communities in the Bay Area. As the director of the Jedi section of the National Association of Interpretation, he or they focus on justice, equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion, hence the term Jedi. In engaging our most vulnerable, beloved communities, they worked as a naturalist for the East Bay Regional Park District for a decade before recently accepting a position as the Community Development Manager for Children and Nature Network based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Welcome, Francis, and we are really looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us. Thank you.
Thank you, Birgit. Thank you, everybody, for having me in your Backyard Growers Club. I want to thank Becky, sir, for inviting me onto this platform, Allison, and everybody else that's in the leadership team. I also want to acknowledge that we're on Chochenyo land. If you're in Alameda, you're on Chochenyo land. I'm in present day Tuibun, which is in Fremont/Union City, and I have a couple of maps behind me that show you a bit of the different types of nations, tribes, cultural groups that are here in what we now know as California. In fact, California has the biggest presence of not only languages, cultural groups, political organizations in all of Turtle Island or North America. It also has the largest amount of the population of Native peoples from all over coming to this land, oftentimes in places like the Central Valley, metropolitan areas like the Bay Area, as well as Los Angeles. So it's a really great place to live, and it's evidenced by the people who have lived here since time immemorial, along with the folks who have moved here like myself. I'm an immigrant from the Philippines. I came here to the United States when I was 5 years old. And I actually moved to the city I live in still, in Union City. And then after that, I moved to different parts of the Bay, oftentimes really close to the shoreline, just have an affinity for the water, as well as the Chochenyo, along with other Ohlone groups that I'll talk about sort of the etymology of the word Ohlone, and how it's also equated with the term Costanoan, which was introduced by the Spanish when they first made contact with the native groups here back in 1769. Over here on this side, we have, oh, there we go, a drawing from a Rumsen Ohlone excellent person named Stephen Arevalo, who did for Coyote Hills, where I used to work as a naturalist for many years. A artist rendering of a program that maybe some of you have been to. I see one of my friends here on the Zoom, Nesa, who is a East Bay Regional Park recreation leader. Thanks for joining us. I think you live in Alameda as well. And I know that you've been to the gathering, which has been going on now for 29 years. We had to, of course, curtail it because of the pandemic last year. And of course, the fact that Native people in this land, especially in California, folks who are in the missions, are no stranger to pandemics, and how the pandemics of very now rudimentary diseases like syphilis and smallpox and measles decimated a population of folks back in the late 1700s and mid 1800s as well, all the way up to that time, is an indication of that historical trauma, that intergenerational trauma that's not only evidenced by how folks live the way that they live today, but also how their ancestors have lived and have had to hide out and be resilient and try to survive not only the pandemics, but also the genocide that resulted from Americans coming here to look for gold. So we'll touch upon a lot of those issues in my talk today. I'm no historian, I'm a naturalist, an interpreter, not a language interpreter, but somebody who interprets cultural and natural history. Like Birgit mentioned, I'm the JEDI, the section director for NAI, and NAI stands for National Association for Interpretation. So a lot of us are park rangers, a lot of us are naturalists, and folks who work in museums and zoos and even tourist destinations to appropriately interpret what you're looking at and do it in a way that's provocative, that inspires a love for the resource, as well as a desire to protect it well into the future. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen, and oh gosh, I think I might have clicked on my my email to get to the Zoom here. So bear with me. I'm going to just swiftly, adeptly go to my Google slide deck here and start the presentation. Let me know if it's not working. So the title is Acknowledging Chochenyo Land and History. The X there is to be more inclusive, to ensure that we're not only talking about the oftentimes cis heteronormative, patriarchal, colonized history of this area, especially a European Eurocentric perspective, but also one that includes non-binary as well as a female perspective as well. So when we talk about repatriating lands, repatriating ancestors back to where they belong, oftentimes we say rematriate instead of repatriate, just shifting the narratives so that we are including inclusive of everybody. Like I mentioned, Tuibun is in present-day Union City, Fremont, in Chochenyo land. Ohlone is a modern construct word that became popularized by the Ohlone Way, which is a book that many of you have read by Malcolm Margolin. It's well into its 39th year of publishing, and it's a really good introduction to the spirit of Ohlone peoples, not necessarily the specific facts and ways of living that was specific to this area, but definitely a good rendering of what life might have been here before contact with the Spanish. And then you'll see some of the little things that I have over here at the end of like long walks on the beach, which is meant to be funny and flippant, but I do love the beach. I go to the ocean quite a bit. And the Costanoans, the Ohlones, again, the term Costanoan came from Costaño, which is what the Spanish gave to the name or moniker for the people here, because they live right next to the coast. Whether it's the bay or the ocean, this is a coastal area rich in biodiversity and hence rich in resources. So the Ohlone, which we're going to talk about, is a grouping of different people actually, are considered very culturally rich, and this land is incredible for that. Whether we're talking about shellfish for not only food and sustenance, but also for regalia, which is what they would wear for ceremony, as well as a currency that they would trade with other native groups, or the plants, the animals the water, of course, the salt that's within the water. All of these things are resources that made them very, very rich. It's also a beautiful land that we live on, and the water that we drink from, as well as you can see here, navigate on as well. All right, go to the next slide here. And we might know about land acknowledgements and how it's become more of a sexy thing to do, especially the organization that I belong to, East Bay Regional Parks, took quite a bit to just get a land acknowledgement into our events, into our programs. And you know, the acknowledgement is there. I took a workshop with these three friends of mine. From the left, Karina Gould, who was Karkian and Chochenyo, Greg Castro, Tortural Salinan, and also Remai Touche and Rumson, as well as Kenyon Sayers Roods, who you might know, if not her, her mom, Anne-Marie Sayers, the tribal chairwoman for Indian Canyon down in Hollister, Chismutsun and Shumash. And this was a workshop at San Francisco State a couple of years back. And the way Karina had told the audience there that resonated with me quite a bit was the fact that when groups of Indians, her ancestors would go from territory to territory, they would have to announce themselves to the group that they're going to, the land that they're going to. So they would acknowledge it, whether through smoke, through medicine, through verbal songs, in a way that you're going there in a good way, so that you're making sure that the people who live there in that territory know that you're coming in with good intentions, whether to trade, to just pass through, or anything else. So that is where a land acknowledgement comes from, where you would acknowledge as a guest what land you're on for that purpose. And we do that now when we do programs, when we do Zooms, even just meetings. I just want to make sure that I'm doing a land acknowledgement. And it can be as simple as that, as well as, or more complex, depending on what venue or forum that you're in. Here on the right, you'll see a map that was published by, at the time, she's retired now, Cultural Services Coordinator for East Bay Regional Parks, Beverly Ortiz. She was also a naturalist at Coyote Hills, which is a park in Fremont that I worked at for many years. And she published this map along with a series of maps showing the different histories of the land and the people who have come over time after contact with the native folks. Now you'll see here that there's not a clear delineation of Ohlone, and that's intentional in my estimation. There is the book, The Ohlone Way, that was popularized after anthropologists in the mid-1900s, ethnographers, linguists, somehow don't exactly know like the complete origination of it, but we do know that there is a village in Ramaytush land over here in the peninsula, over at the coast by San Gregorio, Pescadero Creek, called Ohlone. And Ohlone was somehow changed to Ohlone, and it became popularized with the Ramaytush, the Chochenyo, Karkin, Tamian, and then we'll go all the way down here to these different groups, all the way down to Shalon and Rumson. The Esalen is a different group. And the reason why it's different is because their language are from a Penutian language base. And that is the reasoning behind grouping all of those different groups into Ohlone. You have Chochenyo and Tamian, Ramaytush here with the three little dots here. If you read this, which is a little bit blurry, it says that they're a dialect. So it's sort of like you would speak to somebody in Australia and still be able to understand them, but you might have differences in language and differences in idioms and all the other things that would go with having a different dialect. And then on if you were to have folks from Chochenyo territory go down to Mutsun or Rumson territory, they most likely will still understand each other, but not as much. So that's just sort of the relationship behind all of that. And then you have other groups. So we know the Coast Miwok up here. Maybe people have heard of the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria, which include Coast Miwok as well as Southern Pomo folks. Pomo folks are very world renowned for their basketry, and Ohlone people are as well. There's a lot of differences, but there's also a lot of similarities between the different groups here in Central California. All right. Now I invite, and I see that we can put anything in the chat or any questions that you might have. Feel free to just, interject, and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Francis, there's a question already about the Land of Many Languages maps, and if you have a resource for folks to get one of those maps themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for the question.
Yep.
They're published by the East Bay Regional Park District, and they are most likely available in print at the visitor centers such as Crab Cove, Coyote Hills, definitely down in Fremont. And you can give them a call before you go to see if they do have them, but they're also available online. So if you do a quick search for Native peoples of the East Bay, you'll be able to find that map, along with other maps that indicate the different periods after contact, like the Rancheria periods, the ranchos, and also contact by different folks like the English. Why do we have Sir Francis Drake Boulevard in Coast Miwok territory in San Geronimo? Well, because Sir Francis Drake landed in that area over there by Point Reyes. So all of that is in there. It's a really wonderful resource. So now, oh, you're welcome. This is another excerpt of that one of the maps within that publication, and it is intentional in that it doesn't have the delineation between a Chochenyo, Ohlone, and Bay Miwok. What you have instead is different villages, and by virtue of the size of the font, you'll see that the population was larger. Also, the footprint, you see there's 2 Huchins, which means that that's a very big village that not only included, as you can see, Oakland, present-day Oakland, and Alameda. And Alameda might look a little bit unfamiliar to you because it's not an island, it's actually a peninsula, which includes Lake Merritt as a lagoon. Many of us know that the channel was put in here in the early 1900s to have ships go through, and made Alameda into an island. And also landfill was put in there to make Bay Farm Island and other, or add to it, amend to it. So that was intentional because this is a map before contact. Also, you'll see landforms and mountains and ranges over by Tatcan, which is present-day Danville, San Ramon. You'll see Tuxtla, which is Chochenyo for Mount Diablo. And that's, of course, many of us have seen or been to Mount Diablo. Chukan and Volvon are Bay Miwok, not Ohlone or Chochenyo, whereas Saklan is in present-day Orinda, Moraga, Lafayette, going into Oakland over here on this side. And Carquin might seem familiar to you if you've ever crossed the Carquinez Bridge and Carquinez Straits. That's what that's named for, village not only here on this side of the bay, but also on the other side in present-day Vallejo. There's a park over there in Vallejo called Glen Cove, and it's also known as Segorate. And many of us know the Segorate Land Trust. There was an occupation of that land for 98 days to try to make the Vallejo Recreation District not have a parking lot there and honor the fact that there's a burial site and a shell mound over there. So that is where the name Segorate Land Trust, which is the only indigenous land trust by indigenous women I believe in Turtle Island in North America. All right, so let me show you a few of my friends here. We have Carla, who's on the call today. Thanks for joining us, Carla. Her sister Desiree. She used to be a park ranger for Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and their lovely mom, Brenda. They're offering prayers at the West Berkeley Shell Mound. Maybe some of you know about the The recent revelation happened a few weeks ago at the Shell Mound. Even though it's registered as an endangered historic site, which very few places in the world are, just was recently registered about a year ago. The developers, the city, and not the city, but a court had ruled that the developers can build on it. So the Native folks, including Corina Gould, who we saw in the first slide, are sort of spearheading the movement, along with lots of allies and accomplices to stop that from happening. Right. Oops. Let me try to advance to the next slide. Oh, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to a video, because there is, you know, of course, once I say I'm going to go to video, I'm going to advance to the next slide inadvertently. There we go. So let me get out of that. Look at my very many tabs. Y'all can see the stuff that I watch, like Saturday Night Live and stuff, and MCU movies. And I'm going to go to a full screen here, and we're going to watch this short video on the West Berkeley Shell Mound. Let me make sure, first of all, that I have optimized the sound and video, so everybody, where can I see that? Okay. Well, if there's any problems with the sound or the audio, video, just holler, and I'll stop it and re-share the screen.
There's no current sound.
Ah, did somebody say there's not sound?
Correct. There is no
Okay, great.
sound.
Thank you for pointing that out. Let me go ahead and reshare my screen, as all of us are now Zoom aficionados. There is a little cursor thingy or checkbox to say share sound and optimize for video, which I will do now. So let me know again if it's not working.
Okay.
Grandmothers and grandfathers, Creator, we ask that you be here with us today. We ask that you go into our hearts. We continue to ask for prayers for protection.
Oh,
West Berkeley Shell Mound has done this amazing thing. All of these people from all walks of life are coming together to try to preserve and protect it. People from all walks of life come there and pray together now, in ceremony and song, and bring their own ceremonies there. It's become a place where people understand their connection to this land and what their relationship should be with the first people of this land. And we're giving people an opportunity not to push people outside, but to bring people inside and to try to figure this out together. We're creating something way bigger than ourselves. This imagining this place of opening a creek again where water should always flow free, for us to be able to open it up and to sing to that water again in the way it should be sung to. To allow children to laugh and play in water like that is good for the water, and it's good for human beings. Water's alive. To allow us to put our feet on the ground and to dance the way we were supposed to dance is an amazing thing. For 200 years, we haven't been able to do that in our own territory. To create a mound that's possible, a mound that is either the one that we imagine now, or to recreate a shell mound so that people could actually see what these were like. To find a place to reinter our ancestors. To give dignity back to those ancestors, but also to the people that are living today. And not just the Ohlone people, but it gives dignity back to everyone that lives in our territory now. And I think that's the importance of doing this work, the importance of a new vision that's there, that we can bring people to. Where do you take people that come here, people from all over the world, and talk about who the Ohlone people are? And there is not one place to do that. Berkeley would be the first place. And I think that people are putting strong prayers down there that Berkeley will be that first place, and that we want to help Berkeley be that place. It was the first place my ancestors put that village, and so it should be the first place that stands up for those ancestors as well.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead and come back. Oh,
Francis, as you get back to your slideshow, can I ask a couple questions?
absolutely, thank you.
Awesome. Tiffany is in Oakland near Lake Merritt and is asking if
Oops.
she
Sorry,
is.
y'all. It seems like
That stuff in the dying culture to keep it around for scholars in the
YouTube
future. And
automatically went on there. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
That's okay. She is near Oakland in Lake Merritt, and is wondering if the Huichin, the name of the is the name of the people or the name of the village. And is
okay.
she not on Ohlone land as she had previously thought, and instead on Huichin land?
Yeah, thank you for Tiffany for clarifying that. I was actually going to go back to this slide that I sort of glossed over the title of, and let me go back to that and share my screen once again. And yeah, I think I get the hang of this already, but as usual, there we go. Okay, share screen, there we go. And again, holler out if you don't see the slide presentation here where it says Alameda is Huichin / Chochenyo land. So Huichin is the name of the village, and Chochenyo is the name of the grouping of villages that is also a language group. Karkin is one of these very unique villages that is both a village and a language group. And I'm just gonna reverse to the other map here, and you can see the names of the other language groups here. And out of these 3 dialects and 7 languages in Ohlone territory, you have about 58 different villages, and Huichin is one of them, but one of the biggest ones because it not only contains the present-day cities of Oakland, Berkeley, of course, you know, the little tiny Kensington and Albany, but also the Emeryville Bay Street shell mound that many of us know about. And that was one of the biggest shell mounds in the territory. In the early 1900s, anthropologist named Nels Nelson did a survey of the different shell mounds all around the bay, including Coast Miwok, Karkin, and Bay Miwok, and there was 425 different shell mounds along the coastal area of the bay, just that. So you could imagine how many villages, which oftentimes is equated to a shell mound or a series of shell mounds, that there are in the whole native land, indigenous lands before contact, and how much of it is now buried under development or dammed and underwater, like Los Vaqueros Reservoir, and also destroyed. And much of the land is used for farming because, as you would imagine, the shells put in a rich amount of nutrients, as well as the fires, the sacred fires over many, many generations would also add to the health of the land. The ranchers afterwards and the farmers really valued that land. Thank you for that question. Anybody else had any questions? Okay, cool. I'll go ahead and advance. And then the term BIPOC, many of us have heard of. It's Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And it's centering Black and Indigenous folks. Oftentimes, they're the ones who have a lot of the maladies of society, whether it's being pulled over by the police disproportionately, being killed by them, etc. We want to center them with people of color, along with immigrants like myself, to designate them as groups that can oftentimes be marginalized. And here are some things that we've seen over the past decade or so, like the Dakota Access Pipeline protests and movement over in Standing Rock Reservation in the Dakotas. So many of the people here are indigenous. Many of them are allies and accomplices. They're the ones not only fighting for the rights of their relatives and the land that they're on, and the water rights as well. Again, the pipeline could potentially burst, and it did burst, a few years afterwards. And they're also fighting for non-native people's rights as well. And that happens all over the world. Also in the state of Hawaii, you can see Mauna Kea is a sacred peak to the Native Hawaiians, and it's slated to have a telescope put up there by the University of California. And then over to the left, you have this really sad and morose phenomenon called missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and people. Oftentimes you have violence and murder and other maladies happen to young women who are Indigenous, especially, and lots of times in areas where there are multinational companies, not only the United States, but in First Nations groups in Canada and Mexico, where oftentimes they're targeted as dispensable, killed, missing, kidnapped, and much of the law enforcement don't put much resources into solving those murders or looking for the people who persecuted them. Oftentimes it's non-Indigenous peoples. The research shows that it's mostly white folks who are doing it, white men especially. Not to say that there isn't violence perpetrated by Native folks, Native men on Native women, but oftentimes people will use that as a straw person's argument, and we just want to make that as visible as possible so that it can be remedied. Now, this is a history not necessarily of the local area, but you have to know the history of Indigenous peoples in Turtle Island or North America and all over the world, because without knowing that history and referencing it and dealing and working and building relationships with Native people here, then it's not authentic. It's more performative than anything else. So just wanted to point that out and then move on to the next slide. BIPOC are also people of the global majority. So oftentimes we're listed as minorities here in the United States, which will, eventually into the future be the reverse. But in all of the world, brown and black folks are the ones who are the majority. Over in my home country, the Philippines, the southernmost island in Mindanao, the Lumad are fighting for their water and air and land rights and just basic survival, really. But they're getting killed. They're getting persecuted by not only military, the corporations that are profiteering over the degradation of the land and the water, but also they're in bed with the government. So these are things that have been replicated all over the world, and unfortunately are the most vulnerable of these warriors and fighters, especially the elders and the leaders, are the ones being targeted. Over on the right, we have Namonte Nenquimo, who's Warani, and she's in present-day Ecuador, and she won the Goldman Environmental Prize, which is an annual prize, not unlike the Nobel Prize for something like environmentalism and conservation. You can see she's got a glove with oil there to show that the oil that is traveling through her country and through the waterways will spill, and that we've seen that in the Bay at least every few years, every year really, even more frequently than that. All right, so we talked a little bit about intergenerational trauma with the pandemics, also the genocide. So Indians were being killed, and it was codified and subsidized by the state, by the federal government back in the 1850s. There was a extermination of Indians predicted by the first governor, Peter Burnett, and they're being erased as well, meaning that they're not in the conversation. And in fact, in the latest presidential election, this was the poll that CNN put out that, as you can see, something else is supposed to indicate Native Americans, but they didn't even put that. You can also see the importance of protecting elders in Native culture and how the pandemic now, in COVID, was so detrimental, especially to the Dene Nation down in the southwest of the United States. And many of you might know Vince Medina. He's Chochenyo. He's from Halkin or Urgin, down in the San Lorenzo, San Leandro, Hayward area. His family's lived there, since the beginning. And he and his partner Louis Trevino started Cafe Ohlone in Berkeley, and Makamham, which is a indigenous food revival and catering company. Now, shortly after CNN put that poll out, a lot of Native folks put up this on, I guess, Etsy or something, and said, strong, resilient, something else, which is, a sort of a flippant, funny way of saying that, yeah, we're still going to laugh at this condition, this erasure that we've been put under for generations, even though it's not right. Now we know about Representative Deb Haaland becoming the Secretary of the Interior, also, which is important because that's where the NPS and other Park Service organizations are, as well as the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is amazing because since the beginning of the BIA, oftentimes there's people in the head who have really not only put Native folks in the back and not prioritize them, but of course you have not only the genocide here in California, the massacres all over Turtle Island, the wars. You also have the boarding schools and people being taken away from their families, and also to this day, lots of Native folks who have a lot of maladies. And now having the first Indigenous woman in that seat is amazing, and hopefully will spell more Native folks going into seats, not just appointed, but also elected as well. And then here is a picture of lots of tribal chair people in the California. A couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half or so ago, Governor Newsom formally apologized to federally recognized tribes. But there's also a lot of Native folks who are not in federally recognized tribes or state recognized tribes. And that's something that we want to make sure that we are ameliorating. And you might have recognized a woman in the video along with Karina and the Munoz sisters and mom, Ruth Orta, over on the left, holding a picture of her mom, Trina, who's an ancestor. Ruth is 87 years old. She's as old as the park district that she works for, East Bay Regional Parks. Her daughter, Mona, is right next to her, and Mona's daughter, Rita, next to her, and Athena, her great-granddaughter. In fact, she has 37 great-great-grandchildren and 7, I messed it up. 37 great-grandchildren and 7 great-great-grandchildren. And since I haven't seen her in about a year or so, because of the pandemic, that might have even grown bigger. And we are still here. This is a quote from her. 5 generations a woman. When Alfred Kroeber, the anthropologist back in the 1920s, he published the famous Handbook of California Indians in 1925. He declared the Ohlone extinct. And as you can see here, they're not. I mean, you can just see from Ruth's family themselves. And Ruth is also the tribal chairwoman for her tribe, the Himren Ohlone. Now, all this is from a curriculum, which I'm going to share at the end, along with having questions at the end. So if you don't have your question answered now, we have a little bit of time at the end as well to answer any questions. Now, culture is definitely a past that oftentimes is romanticized because Native people today are modern folks just like us. They have jobs like us. Sometimes they're working for their tribe or their family members. And oftentimes they're doing what we call a day job. So we want to point that out, that we want to use the modern context and not always the past context. It oftentimes is the what quote unquote could be the buckskin and feathers romanticization of Native folks. And here are some Bay Miwok and Ohlone folks at Mission San Jose and Fremont. They didn't really allow them to do a lot of their cultural dances or speak their language. They really changed their lifestyle from their food to their clothing to the fact that they were the ones who built the missions in the first place, tended farm. So they didn't farm as an agricultural practice, but they did manage the land in a good way through burning, through tilling, using digging sticks, through aerating the soil, harvesting, reseeding, returning back to the earth. So there's a misnomer that they didn't do anything to the land. They did a lot. And burning is one practice that is sorely missed, as you can see with all the fires and conflagrations we've had over the past 10 years only, with the 5 biggest fires in California history, the last year being a couple of the biggest fires with the SCU and the CZU complexes here nearby. Then we have people today, like the Amakatura dance group from Paro Valley, and into the future, knowledge being passed down from elders to youth. You can use tools like their ancestors used, like bones from deer. The shoulder blade would be fashioned into a saw called a scapula saw, and many folks will use that to cut this tule here that's found in the marsh. But you could also use modern tools like scissors. Instead of a mortar and pestle to pound acorn, use a coffee grinder, and it's perfectly okay. Because you have these modern tools, why not use them? And my role before I left the park district, you can see I'm in my ranger outfit over there, on Coast Miwok land in the Marin Headlands, was to amplify that and to use my ability to work with folks from different marginalized communities, especially intersectional ones where you have different marginalized identities like lesbian, gay folks, or what we call two-spirit in Native groups, and also non-binary, different folks from different religions, as well as backgrounds, cultural, religious, whatever else you might have that is usually subjugated in history. And the term DEI is something that's used, EDI, in many industries. I've made it into a new term because I'm a Star Wars fan, to Jedi, including justice. Environmental justice had a long history in environmental movement, as well as restorative justice in formal education, and also amplifying accessibility, ensuring that folks who are disabled, who are hard of hearing, who need to read lips to be able to enjoy a program. Of course, with the pandemic, the masks have made it difficult to have that accessibility. So those are all things that we take into consideration. There's silver lining for all of these Zooms that we've been having is that it's been more accessible to folks who might not be able to get to a spot, transportation or limited resource. So there is things that we can learn from this pandemic. And then I'm just going to check my time here. I'm running a little bit behind. This is a wayfinder up in Mission Peak. And Mission Peak is one of the parks, one of the most popular parks in the East Bay Park system. Maybe some of you have climbed it. It is not my favorite hike. I'm going to tell you that right now. It's not even that high. It's 2,517 feet. But the city of Fremont has adopted it on their logo. The Chochenyo call it Risimu. It's a sacred peak, much like Tuishtak or Mount Diablo. And it's a great place to go and exercise. Yeah, for sure. But it's become loved too much. So there's a lot of erosion. There's a lot of folks who will throw garbage and not pick it up in that area. And that's definitely antithetical to any kind of indigenous practice that we know of. To not leave no trace, because leave no trace can be problematic as well, because Native folks would use the land and offer tobacco or sage. That's not leaving a trace, or do a fire. So we have to be really nuanced. And when we're considering all of these principles like leave no trace, because it's more of a colonized way of thinking, especially bagging peaks, right? You want to get to nature and climb this peak and conquer it. It's like manifest destiny. So there has to be some kind of compromise between how folks look at recreation and land conservation and stewardship that not only takes a Eurocentric approach, but also an indigenous one as well, honoring the indigenous peoples of that area. Now, is anybody here? I'm gonna make this a little interactive, and I'll also stop for some questions. Know what Fremont is named after, or who Fremont is named after. Fourth biggest city in the Bay Area, behind Oakland, San Jose, and San Francisco.
John Fremont.
There you go. So John C. Fremont, who is a general in the army and led one of the biggest massacres on people up in Wintu territory, up in present-day Redding and Shasta, killed upwards of 200 Indians with his group. So we have these names of people. Volmer Peak in Berkeley, who instituted modern policing practices, but also was tied with folks who are into eugenics. Lots of folks in past who are glorified with statues and names, who are glorified, who are racist and have this racist origin. So it's just something to consider when we are talking about the places that we live and what people are named after. The Muwekma Ohlone tribe in the San Francisco Bay Area, they were successful in petitioning the Peter Burnett Middle School, named after the first governor of California, who I mentioned predicted a war of extermination against the Indians. And they changed the name to Ohlone Middle School, a victory that just happened a couple of years back. And then I did a Channel 7 News piece on Mission Peak, talked about how it's a nice hike for getting the blood pumping, getting the family out, dog on leash and off leash, controlled by voice. All these nice talking points. I talked about the indigenous history, and guess what? The editor, person who put it together, just completely edited out the indigenous piece. So I mean, the erasure goes a long way, not just intentional, like they did, but also unconscious in many cases, just something that doesn't fit the piece, I guess. So that's why they took it out. Okay.
Francis, I do have a couple questions.
Oh, yeah.
You're ready for them?
Please, thank you.
If you could tell us if the Huichin did any type of farming, and or were they mainly gatherers? And if so, what comprised their diet mainly?
Went the wrong hole. Sorry.
That's okay.
All right. So the Huichin, again, is comprised of present-day Oakland, Richmond, Emeryville. A lot of what we know is not specific to the villages. The Spanish kept meticulous records in their missions of the names of people, the changed names oftentimes, and also the village that many people came from. A lot of people intermarried. So for example, a lot of the Chochenyo, the Rumsen, Mutsun would marry with folks from Yokut land over in the Central Valley, because they were put in the same mission, like Mission San Juan Bautista. But there's not much known of the specific practices. An ethnographer in the 1920s and 30s named J.P. Harrington, John Peabody Harrington, went all over California, including Ohlone territory, a lot focusing in Chumash territory as well. And he took meticulous notes on language, place names, animal plant names, and also a big focus on ethnobotany in the Rumsen Mutsun territories. So we sort of extrapolate a lot of the things that he learned from the informants of that area to the rest of Ohlone territory, just using sort of experimental archaeology. Pretty sure that they did not farm, no evidence of that, but they did use horticulture to manage the land. So they would spread acorn when they were not using it. They had a bigger bounty than they had. There were records of you hear of hunter-gatherer societies, which sort of connotes a primitive lifestyle, but there was lots of coordination between men and women, including the women would carry burden baskets, gather a first round of acorn, go back to the village, put them in granaries, and then they would keep them. They would store really well. Then after a few weeks, they would go back for a second harvest. Some of the acorns was still in the oaks. The young boys would climb the trees, and then they would shake them, and then the woman would pick them up. So those are the things that we know of, that there is an intentional land management plan. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's another one about shell mounds, and if it's possible that places like Las Trampas Regional Park, being so far from the shore, but often there's shells found. Is that because of shell mounds?
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of the land has been displaced, but some of it has been kept there. So in places like Las Trampas, you not only see shells, you'll also see arrowheads, mortars, things that would indicate that there was some habitation there. And then in a place called Vasco Caves, which some of us may have gone on a trip, a naturalist-led trip over in Byron, close to Byron, the communities of Brentwood in East Contra Costa County. There's a place there where only special people in different groups would go, from the Yokuts to the Chochenyo to the Bay Miwok. And there was art put up on the windswept caves, pictographs that indicate a place where they would do ceremony, oftentimes around the solstices, to keep a balance in the world. So that's a very special place. You look it up on East Bay Regional Park's website. You can do, hopefully soon, a guided tour with a naturalist. So yeah, there have been instances of shells being found all the way to present day Nevada. Things that were traded, not necessarily traded by the person who brought it over there, but may have been traded from one group to another eastwards, and then to another. Over time, it would find its way to as far as Paiute territory in present day Utah. So yeah, that's definitely a big commerce. Another park I want to tell you about, Brushy Peak, over in Livermore, close to Vasco, and that's a place of an economic hub. It's like their Walmart or Amazon. They would go there and they would trade with one another, not just the Ohlone, but also the Maidu, the Yokut, folks that came from the Central Valley, and that's a big hub of trade. All right, so we're running a little bit out of time, so I'm just going to move on and just mention some best practices, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions. We'll also go over, if anybody would like to go over the 8 o'clock, not a hard stop. I don't have much of a life, so I'll be here for however long you want me to be. Now, one of the best practices that I employ in working with Indigenous folks is, again, portraying them in the modern context. I mean, this is a famous 1816 lithograph by Louis Choris of possibly Ohlone, maybe Bay Miwok folks crossing the bay in a tule boat. And tule is made from the plants that are in the marsh. And these two young folks down there are actually Ohlone. And you've seen one already, Desiree Munoz. She was in the group that was offering prayers at the West Berkeley Shell Mound. And again, she was a park ranger at the Presidio. And her cousin, Sam, was an intern for the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. So you can see that they have this really special connection that harkens back to how their ancestors lived. And they wanted to recreate that through song, story, but also through the historical records that the Spanish and other folks coming from other places would draw and also annotate on them. And this is a slide talking about the intersectionality. Now, LGBTQ is something many of us know, IA+, there's more designations, but the 2S there is indicating two-spirit, which is a pan-Indian term. Pan-Indian is like, can be problematic at times because a lot of people will say, oh, you're Indian, which means like it's like a something not born from tradition per se, but more so like an amalgamation of different cultures. Like a dream catcher is something that has become sort of like a commodified thing, something people will buy from Etsy or from, you know, even like really cheap places like Oriental Trading, which I don't know why they still have that name, but a lot of us teachers know that those plastic goods are crap anyways. So 2S, Two Spirit. The Two Spirit powwow happens every year at Fort Mason. And that's something that, you know, is inclusive of many folks. BIPOC, again, I talked about earlier, Two Spirit and gender non-binary as well. And we have Latinx. Now, the X again for history, herstory is being inclusive. Filipinx, myself, so that it's non-binary. Talking about folks that are not necessarily the two male-female prescribed genders that have been attributed through history. And then lots of immigrants. There's a huge immigrant story here in the you know, we hear about Ellis Island in the East Coast, but Angel Island is a way station, especially for Asian folks. Manzanar in the Eastern Sierra in Payahunadu is a place where Japanese were interred, hundreds of thousands of them during World War II. And then Watsonville, my brethren, the Filipinx that came here early on, there's a race riot in 1934 in Watsonville nearby, and disabled folks. We talked about accessibility, as well as religious folks. Right now, the Palestinians are being persecuted, also Uyghur Muslims in China. So when we talk about this, the reason why I include this in this history with Indigenous folks is we're all Indigenous, at least to the point where we choose to reach back into our indigeneity. So a lot of us who are white are looking for the groups that they belong to with their ancestry. A lot of my non-native friends will do things like flint knapping, making arrowheads and projectile points, which all of our ancestors have done. So it's trying to find that connection with our ancestors. And that's one of the reasons why I use not only he, but also they in Sala pronouns. Sala is Tagalog for they, because I not only I want to de-emphasize the non-binary, but I also want to know folks know that my ancestors walk with me as well. AAPI, of course, we know about the violence that's been perpetrated against Asian American folks that has always been perpetrated, but has been amplified, but also you know, magnified with the amount of violence happening, especially here in the Bay Area. So resource list. I talked about the curriculum that East Bay Regional Parks put out, spearheaded by Bev Ortiz, along with the brochure that she put out. That was 2015, and it's free. You can download it off the website. There's that brochure I told you about, also downloadable. Here's a book called Bad Indians by Dr. Deborah Miranda. She's with the Ohlone Costanoan Esalen Nation. She's a professor. One of my favorite parts of this book is how complex and nuanced it is. And look at her. She's on a horse looking like a cowboy, but she's an Indian. And here is a picture of a blood quantum. Many of us know what a blood quantum is. It's something that's been very problematic, trying to prove that you're Indian and how much blood you have. And this one here is in the shape of a triangle. It looks like an arrowhead. And I'm just going to read what it says, because Native folks I know are one of the groups of the most funniest people that I know, and I always joke around with them. And this figure says, "Wannabe creations make up a beautiful, totally fake Indian design that means absolutely nothing to any North or South American tribe." So this is things you can do with your chart for calculating quantum of Indian blood. It's just bullshit. So how much love and history you put into your ceremony, to your family, is what makes you Native. And then lastly, I'll mention an American genocide. This is recorded, so you can see the recording and see the rest of the resources here. And then I'll leave the rest of the time to questions, again, going over the hour if anyone would like.
Awesome. Thank you, Francis. I do have a couple questions. And since you have the Ohlone Way listed in your reference slide, we have a question about specifically that book and the fact that it states that the Ohlone practiced in infanticide, that's I think how you say it, to control their population. And Marlene is wondering if this has been determined to be true, and does anyone know where this information was gathered?
But before
Yeah,
you do
I'm
that,
not.
before you answer, Francis, I'd just like to invite everybody to turn on their video, and maybe we can go to gallery view and we can all be here together.
Awesome.
So thank you, Francis.
All right, thanks for that suggestion. Love to see everybody's faces if you're open to that. Not no worries. All right. So as I understand the question, the infanticide is practiced according to the Ohlone way. Is that what they were saying?
Correct.
I don't think I remember that part of that book. It would have definitely struck me, right? So I don't know. I couldn't answer that. With any group of people, there are things that are done that could be outliers of the actual practices happening. And if it was done, it's such a stark event, one that's very to me at least, something that would strike me so much that it might even be amplified by its the seriousness of the event. So I don't know.
Okay, thank you. And on the topic of books, if you know of some books that you would recommend that touch on indigenous foods and practices of the indigenous Californians.
Yeah, so this is one book that I love. It's called Seaweed and Salmon and something else. I don't know, but it's seaweed is still gathered to this day by many Northern California tribes, and salmon is huge. Unfortunately, with the damming of many of the rivers like Eel River and Klamath and going into Oregon, it's something that indigenous groups are fighting for. The Yurok and Karuk are the strongest tribes in being able to fight for their rights. So that's a good book. I don't know the exact title, but I know Seaweed and Salmon is in there. Let's see. I couldn't tell you a books per se, but there is a native chef here in Oakland named Crystal Wapipa, and she has Wapipa's Kitchen, and she's Kickapoo. She's all over the place. She was on Chopped, and she's an amazing chef that does indigenous foods. Of course, there's Vince Medina and Luis Trevino with Cafe Ohlone and Makamham. Indigenous foods is something that I would encourage us all to not only increase our health, but also our connection to the land that we live on.
Absolutely. Birgit Evans, who is on the board here at Alameda Backyard Growers, has put an offer out that she has a book written in the 1950s by a woman who studied the plants used by the native tribes of many of the Western states and their uses. And she is kind of putting it out there that she's welcoming anyone with interest that she can scan it for them. And to be in touch and to show your interest, you all are welcome to connect with us at info@alamedabackyardgrowers.org. And just to reiterate, this presentation is being recorded. So if you need to reference anything that Francis has shared with us this evening, that will also be up on our website shortly. A couple other questions are, is there anyone compiling of the wisdoms we are losing, both Ohlone and beyond?
I went to Berkeley for my undergrad, and I had the fortune of going to a class called Linguistics, Lost or Indigenous Endangered Languages of California. Professor Leanne Hinton wrote a book called Flutes of Fire. So it has a lot of compiled a lot of different histories in native California. So again, Flutes of Fire by Leanne Hinton. Here's a really good book that I like to reference. It's compiled by L. Frank Manriquez and also Kim Hoagland, First Families. And it has written about maybe 15 years ago or so, just a lot of history of Native groups, but also families. And it emphasizes the families, from about the 1830s when the missions were secularized all the way to the mid 1900s. A lot of this culture was lost because there had to be. If you were identified as an Indian, you might be killed or might be taken away to go to a boarding school and they're killed. So, a lot of people denied their Indian heritage. A lot of it was thankfully brought back by family members, by rancherias, where they would do a ceremony together, different groups, as well as those ethnographers and linguists and anthropologists that help Native folks through informants to spread that amongst tribal members, as well as those who are not in tribes. So that is how we got a lot of our knowledge.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Sarah, for putting those down.
Yeah.
In fact, it's Flutes of Fire, like.
Oh,
Jazzy.
thank you.
No worries. And Leanne Hinton, I'll go ahead and write it in here. So.
Oh, I beat you.
Yeah, you got it. Okay.
There's another question about what's the name of the ranchera based on? It sounds like a white word.
Oh, rancheria. Yeah. I think that's a Spanish word. And it's there are reservations in California, especially in places that land is not so expensive. But what's a lot of the places where they came together, like here in Sonol, the Alisal Rancheria was around, and it was also where Phoebe Hearst helped a lot of the Native folks in that area of Sonol, where they had the Hearst family had land, and the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria is another one that we know but there's all over California. Rancherias are more a grouping of different Indians. A lot of times the history of them coming from missions north of Sonoma, you'll have folks, there was not a mission system. So you'll have just the Native folks intermarry with one another and have different groups with each other. So there's a long history of adaptation, resiliency after contact. And that's something that we want to also recognize along with the history before contact as well.
Awesome. A couple other questions are there any Indigenous run outdoor organizations that cover camping, hiking, learning about nature?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of this is on Instagram. Natives Outdoors, run by Professor Len Nessifer. Natives Outdoors. And also Indigenous Women Who Hike, Indigenous Women's Wilderness. A lot of them are centered around what I said before, Payahunadu, where the water flows in the Eastern Sierra. So there are lots of different leaders in the areas that we have here in California. Again, Indigenous Women Who Hike, Indigenous Women's Wilderness, also Natives Outdoors as well is a group to look at.
Awesome. Jill found the book you were referencing earlier called Seaweed, Salmon, and Manzanita Cider.
Oh, I got Manzanita Cider.
Yeah, A Californian Indian Feast is the subtitle. Beatrice wants to plug Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kimmerer. I think I got that right. Indigenous women with the discussing the teaching of plants.
Yeah, so Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer is Potawatomi, and she is amazing. Her books, Gathering Moss and Braiding Sweetgrass, just speak to the disconnect that we all have had, including Indigenous folks, with the land. Not, she's academic and she has a focus on, the science, but she marries that so well with her family's history, her tribe's history of speaking to the plants, of having them speak to you, and to gather them when it's right, and only telling stories in the time of year that it's appropriate, and asking permission. So all of these things are wonderful that she portrays in her books. And if you haven't done so already, I just put Leanne Hinton's spelling for Flutes of Fire over here, because I just noticed it was misspelled in the chat. Yes, go look up her audiobook, because she puts me to like a calm that I'm like I'm a little baby when I hear her speak. And I've been on a lot of her Zooms, and she's such a giving and wonderful person. Again, Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer.
There's also, Allison is wondering if you can tell us about the gardening being done out at Segurate in the land trust out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So just nearby to Alameda in East Oakland, there's a place called Planting Justice, and they do wonderful work with growing sustainably native plants. Also, they're building a arbor over there that they got reclaimed redwood, and they're having volunteers just come and help out. Pandemic has sort of put a mix on a lot of those things, but they're still going strong. And yes, if you'd like to get involved, just look up Segurate. You know, I want to thank the Alameda Backyard Growers Club for generously donating to the Shumi land tax, the proceeds from this event. So thank you for that.
One last recommendation was from NASA regarding the Chumash ethnobotany book. I'm not sure if you can speak to that.
The Chumash have a wonderful array of resources and tribes and people and friends, and they're just an amazing group of folks who are willing to share. I mean, think about the history that many of them have in their generational trauma, where folks come to them and oftentimes want some kind of transaction in return. Whereas it should be a gift. It should be something that, you know, when you see sage out there and you want to do a smudge, you don't buy it from a store, you get it as a gift from somebody. So I don't know about the specific Chumash ethnobotany book, but I do know of one that maybe some of you have read before, by M. Cat Anderson, Tending the Wild. It's a really wonderful ethnobotany book that is very comprehensive of Indigenous California. Again, Tending the Wild by M. Cat Anderson. It's really nice for everybody to continue to stay here on this, and I appreciate all of your questions and your thoughtfulness and attentiveness, you know, on a Tuesday night when you could be watching, you know, This Is Us or whatever else is on. Emma, good to see you. Becky, great to see you. And I'm available for questions long afterwards. I'm just going to put my Instagram handle here, so you can DM me if you have any questions. No longer a ranger, but I am still working with communities here and also afar with the Children in Nature Network. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today and for having me in your club. And I go to Alameda all the time, and it's a wonderful place to live. So I hope to see you out there.